आप सभी श्रोता को एक बार और मेरा प्यार भरा नमस्ते और मेरे सफ़र की यादें में आप सभी का मैं स्वागत करता हूँ। पिछले हफ्ते हमारे साथ अंकल कर्नाकर जी थे और खुशी की बात है, उसी का इंटरव्यू जब हम अब आगे लेकर जा रहे हैं, तो इस हफ्ते हम उनका जो दूसरा भाग है इंटरव्यू का, उसको प्रस्तुत आपके साथ कर रहे हैं। तो जैसे मैंने पूर्व में कहा था कि अंकल जी का जन्म लटोका में हुआ और फिर वहाँ से उनका पढ़ाई-लिखाई लटोका में होते हुए वो ओवरसीज़ में भी रहकर पढ़े हैं और फिर यूनाइटेड नेशंस में काम किया है और पिछले हफ्ते उनका जो पुस्तक का लॉन्च भी हुआ है, तो उस सब को हम जानते हैं और पिछले इंटरव्यू में आशा करता हूँ कि आप सब लोगों ने ज़रूर पसंद किया होगा। तो एक बार और अंकल जी आपका मैं रेडियो विज़वानी के इस कार्यक्रम में स्वागत करता हूँ और हम यहाँ से आगे बढ़ते हैं श्रोता। तो पिछले हफ्ते हम बात कर रहे थे अंकल जी की पढ़ाई का और उन्होंने कहा था कि वो अकेले ही न्यूजीलैंड यूनिवर्सिटी एंट्रेंस का कोर्स जो पढ़ाई किया था और उसका भी कारण दे रहे थे क्योंकि उनको और आगे पढ़ना था और उनके जो प्रिंसिपल साहब थे, एक्टिंग प्रिंसिपल मिश्रा जी थे, उन्होंने उनके काफ़ी सहयोग किया था उस समय। तो अंकल जी, आप जब अपना न्यूजीलैंड यूवी कर चुके थे 1954 में जैसे आपने कहा, तो वहाँ से आगे की आप बतलाइए, किस्सा बताइए क्या हुआ?
जी हाँ, वहाँ से मेरा एडमिशन यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ क्वींसलैंड में अप्रूव हो गया
जी।
और मैं वहाँ शुरू किया 1955 में बैचलर ऑफ सर्वेइंग कोर्स इन द फैकल्टी ऑफ इंजीनियरिंग।
जी।
और कोर्स काफ़ी कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव था।
जी।
बहुत कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव था। वो ये कि जो लैंड सर्वेइंग है वो कोई सेकंड थर्ड ईयर में आया। उससे पहले ज़्यादा मैथमेटिक्स और फिजिक्स और जियोलॉजी एक सब्जेक्ट हम लोग कहीं पहले नहीं
कभी
मिला
इसके बारे में नहीं जानते
जियोलॉजी
हैं।
बहुत ज़्यादा हम लोग को
जी।
पढ़ना था। और फिर उसके बाद सब्जेक्ट्स लाइक प्रॉपर्टी वैल्यूएशन,
जी।
टाउन एंड कंट्री प्लानिंग, बिल्डिंग कंस्ट्रक्शन, लैंड लॉ, ये सब है। और फिर जियोडेसी, ये जो दूर दूर के डिस्टेंस है। अब जैसे जब अर्थ जो प्लेनेट है
जी।
वो राउंड स्फीयर है
जी।
और जो हम नापते हैं यहाँ से वहाँ नापता है।
जी।
ये छोटा स्केल में ये स्ट्रेट लाइन है,
जी।
लेकिन वो ग्लोब में वो कर्व है।
बिल्कुल सही।
तो वो कर्व और स्ट्रेट लाइन में काफी मैथमेटिक्स उसमें
अप्लाई करना पड़ता
एडजस्टमेंट करना पड़ा।
जी।
एनीवे, तो 4 साल वहाँ था। तो 5th ईयर में वहाँ के अरेंजमेंट ऐसा रहे कि आफ्टर द यूनिवर्सिटी के बाद 1 साल आर्टिकल्स रहो विद दिस समय। ये सब बहुत आर्टिकल्स वाज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट in all the training of surveyors in every state in Australia and New Zealand, because a lot of practical work had to be done. And how boundaries had to be settled, because people live in suburbs and all that. And after a few years, boundaries get disturbed and all that, and so there were certain procedures. Anyway, I did my 1 year on the Gold Coast. अच्छा, with the surveyor company in the Gold Coast. ये बात हो रहा है अभी 1959. Wow. 59. अब 4 साल यूनिवर्सिटी रहा. Oh my God. 55 to 58. उस समय तो पता नहीं इस जगह का ढांचा क्या हुआ था. तो वहाँ पर तो कोई suburbs है, वो सब swamp land अभी जहाँ पे अभी Bigera Waters है. जी. Bayview Road, Paradise Point, वो सब स्टेट में हम काम किया. Oh my God, interesting. Some के reclamation, new roads and canals and whatever. सब. और फिर नारायण के तरफ भी हम लोग काफी काम किया. जी. अच्छा, तब थोड़ा और वहाँ पे चेंज हुआ. मीन टाइम में हम डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ लैंड से कॉन्ट्रैक्ट का था. फिजी की बात. जी. बिकॉज हमको तो क्विंटन फिजी लौटना है. जी. तो जॉब प्रोस्पेक्ट्स वगैरह दिखता है ना. जी. सब वहाँ से उन्होंने कांटेक्ट करा, डायरेक्टर ऑफ लैंड कांटेक्ट करा यूनिवर्सिटी प्रोफेसर
जी
कि हमसे थोड़ा डिस्कशन करो कि इंस्टेड ऑफ कमिंग बैक गो एंड स्टडी टाउन प्लानिंग। मैंने बताया कि टाउन प्लानिंग की बहुत बड़ी जरूरत है, मैन पावर नहीं है, ओवरसीज से रिक्रूट करना पड़ता है, अभी मिलते नहीं। सो एनीवे आई फाइनली एग्रीड। तो इसमें ऐसा हुआ
जी
वो जो प्रोफेसर 4 years ago बतलाया कि he will take me provided I pass physics, ये वही प्रोफेसर आज अब बतलाता कि अच्छा तुम जाओगे टाउन प्लानिंग।
ओह माय गॉड,
हाँ,
अमेजिंग।
तो हमके थोड़ा हम लोग के डिस्कशन हुआ। I was initially not very happy
जी
because I'm selling about to complete it, about to get registered in a few months' time.
Oh God.
And then he wants me to do that. But finally he convinced me that look, Sydney University is a very top university. And if you do a postgraduate course there, you really learn something. So I went to Sydney University.
Oh God.
Fortunately, I was able to do that. That course was actually an evening course.
जी
And we worked full time. So
अच्छा
I got a job with the Cumberland County Council, Greater Sydney Planning Council.
जी
But what was interesting about that course was that all the students, there were about 18, 20 in the class. They were all professional people. They were surveyors, architects,
तो काम
engineers,
हाँ जी बिल्कुल
real estate developers and all that. So
जी।
it was a different kind of climate where we
वे आपको जहाँ पढ़ना पड़ा जी
so not only we listened to lectures, but we argued with lectures,
जी
and different people came with different
ideas
and
जी
experiences. No?
जी
And these, a lot of them were sort of municipal city engineers from Bondi, from Parramatta, from Leichhardt, from Ryde, from Sutherland and Cronulla and Blacktown, Manly, and so forth. You know, so it was a very good combination of people that I studied with.
जी
And so it was very good. In the second year, final year of the diploma, I topped the class. I got a 50 pound prize.
wow that's
And
wonderful
then I went on to do the masters. I had to write to Fiji for them to agree I do one more year
जी
because diploma to एक level है नहीं, but masters all
next level जी
much more different.
जी
तो masters के लिए thesis के भी जरूरत था. Thesis के हम सब पूरा field work कर लिया लेकिन complete नहीं कर पाया. लेकिन finally I went back to Fiji in '63
जी
and finally submitted the thesis in 1968.
after 5 years
So that was all right.
जी जी
And then later on, just to complete my education, in '63 I went back to Fiji and joined the lands department as a town planner.
जी तो आपका जो यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ सिडनी का डिप्लोमा के बाद आप मास्टर्स शुरू कर दिए थे एंड देन फिर आप चले गए फिजी
Masters, I did all the papers for that.
जी केवल और थीसिस बचा था जी
So when I went back to Fiji, I worked as a town planner and I'll come to the career here, but I'll just complete the
जी
education part. In that process,
जी
I got a study grant to go to London University. It was a time of pre-independence.
जी
That pre-independence time, there was a lot of localization happening.
yes
A lot of political debate and all that. While the political debate was happening, the government was proceeding with strengthening the civil service.
yes
Yeah, so that
with locals
yeah. So that when the British civil service go away, there would be a smooth takeover.
yeah
You know?
transition was smooth
So they were also sending people for training here. The normal was the administrative staff college in Canberra and in London.
जी
But some were given a whole year of study for a proper postgraduate course.
जी
And I was lucky to be one of those, and so I went
to London.
Ji. But it was a very interesting one in my education, in that, as I mentioned, I come from a maths physics background, then went into planning, which is
quite different.
Quite different. Different in a way, but still a lot of the land surveying was involved in there.
Ji.
But it was different in that it was about design of places, location of roads, parks, commercial centers, and so forth. The London was about people, urban sociology, urbanization, urban economics.
Wow, that will be very
people
interesting.
And their livelihood and their affordability and so
where
forth.
people want to live.
Yeah, and now society, how the society divided, the upper class, the middle class, lower class, the working class, the educated class, the tradesmen, and so forth. So that gave me quite a different picture.
So you have quite a different perspective of planning.
In fact, that is what that finally made me to move from the lands department to the housing sector. You know, it was that influence that I saw that, look, all this is all right, but it's the people that matter.
So true.
Yeah, so in career, as I mentioned.
तो लंदन से अंकल जी आप लंदन में किस साल थे वहाँ पर 1968 तो 68 में फिर आप 69 में शायद फिजी वापस कि नहीं खाली एक ही साल के तब लंदन में थे हाँ तो आप अपने करियर के विषय में बताइए तो 1969 में फिर से
हाँ चले I'll just have to go back to 63
अच्छा जी
town planning was town planning में
जी
I think I was influential in setting town planning practice in Fiji. All local governments were required to prepare their planning schemes. And the planning scheme means what the future roads and all that would be, future parks, density of buildings, future land use zone, future industrial areas and expansion and so forth. You know? So I was involved in very many, almost all cities, except perhaps Nosori, because I don't think nothing much was happening in Nosori actually, because after the movement of the closure of the sugar mill, the economy died. You know? But I can sort of identify three things that were in the planning scheme that I made a bit of influence. One was in Lautoka. The first time in the planning scheme, this is back in 1965, I incorporated in the planning scheme a proposal for reclamation of the foreshore. Now, of course, that has been done, but it's progressing and more to be done. But that foreshore reclamation was something that was proposed in the planning scheme. Council was not very happy, but I told them, foreshore doesn't belong to the council anyway, it's common property. So, you know, they accepted it. Then also in Nandi, there was no bus station. They were just parked near off the Queen's Road. So I prepared a scheme for a new bus station located and an expanded market where they are now. But what the effect of that was, that all that commercial land between the market and the Queen's Road became intensified because they were just suburban streets at that time because all the commercial was on the main road.
Yes.
Well, the commercial is still in the main road, but all the consumer type shops are all near the market now. So there's a market.
Just got very concentrated.
Yes, yeah. That was one. And the other one was in Singatoka. There is a Singatoka market, and I was very, very happy with the market because it's the hub of the cell bowl in Fiji. And what happened was, when the tourism boom came, some of the shops were beginning to redevelop around there, and they had their back to the market. So all these shops, when they were developing, they had their backs full of 44-gallon drums and all that parked in the back around the market. So I was a bit upset about that, and I managed to convince the council that, look, the market needs to look a bit better. You can't have all these backyards. So we had a very good meeting. And because there was a subdivision there, I think it's called Mission Street, and all the shops had back to the market. And so when the tourism encouraged the redevelopment, there was danger that the market would be in the backyard. And so the council agreed to change the planning scheme. But these are all commercial people, commercial landlords, So my proposal to give them a commercial frontage in the back, in top of the commercial frontage in the front, went very well.
They would accept that. Yes.
Totally accepted. But the problem was that in some places there had to be a passageway
laneway.
from the market
Laneway, no?
to the other parts of the town, So, and when I suggested 2 locations, okay, they agreed subject to one condition, that they must have commercial frontage on the laneway. Well, it didn't cost me anything.
Yeah.
Plus, it was a public convenience anyway.
Yeah.
So we all agreed.
And then,
but the important thing was that we had to amend the town planning law to allow this
to happen,
because there was a planning scheme already approved and prepared by previous town planner. But to change that,
yes, you got to amend the legislation.
Amend the legislation on a very specific thing. But I was very familiar with it because I applied that in Sydney. So I knew that.
You've done that before. So आपका जो यहाँ का experience है बहुत काम आया.
Oh, बहुत काम आया. No, because the thing I was doing in the Gold Coast was all applied in Nasino later, 10 years later.
Wow. तो यहाँ से आप करियर के विषय में बता
रहे थे. Then I got promoted to assistant director in the next department.
ये 1968 की बात कर रहे हैं आप.
Now it's 1969
or 69.
1970. Yeah, after I came back from London.
Yeah, so 69 में आया.
69 में.
जी.
तब I got promotion to assistant director of lands because they had to create some new posts.
जी.
Because with the politics coming, there were now ministers.
हाँ,
for the first time ministers were.
फिर independence भी होने वाला था ना?
होने वाला था next year.
हाँ.
Ministers and then the directors became permanent secretaries.
जी. Yeah.
तो वो लोग तो permanent secretary बन गए और they were busy with the ministers, and therefore the real
work,
better work.
ये सब छूट रहा है. तो
वहाँ. So they created 2 assistant directors. One for land and administration, one for survey and technical. I was appointed in the land administration. After that involved management of all crown leases. Lease transfer, lease renewal, lease rental, more consent to mortgage and all that.
बहुत भारी काम है. Big thing.
But fortunately, there were some people. There was one old man called Fazal Khan. He knew all the leases backwards.
Wow.
Yeah.
वहाँ पर काम बहुत दिन से किया होगा उसने. जी.
एक lease की एक file है. Poor history of it. Anyway, but one thing that affected me there was that whenever we did a small subdivision allocating land, there would be say 30 lots, and there would be more than 300 applicants.
Oh God.
So 270 went without it, and this sort of worried me quite a bit, really, And that is when the director of lands informed me that this is all as a result of a misapplication of the land clause in the deed of cession, where the whole land was, all of Fiji was ceded, but the British government interpreted it differently. And finally, the government was left with 7% of the land. So he said, that's where we are.
There's not enough land.
I suggested that we do some land acquisition. But he said, the director of land said that that's a very sensitive question because land acquisition is usually buying land from the European owners. And so there was a bit of politics involved because they were all part of the alliance government being formed.
It was a very early stage of that political. Yeah.
And so anyway, then the position of the housing authority suddenly became vacant. It was very unexpected, but it suddenly became vacant. So while all this localization was going on, there was no question of localizing the statutory bodies like the FEA, and the
Housing
and
Authority,
Development Bank, Housing Authority, the Ports Authority, and a few other of these big organizations.
KF था उसमें ना, Civil Aviation,
Civil Aviation. So anyway, I applied for this vacancy, and somehow it was very well received. It was very well received, but it was a good occasion. I list that as one of my happy occasions, but also it was a very complicated one because I was walking into a beehive kind of thing, really. My attraction was that we could do a lot of land development. Through Housing Authority. Yeah, through the Housing Authority. Do a lot of land development, provide a lot of land for people. Houses. It's a wonderful vision. Yeah. But the immediate problem was the overcrowding in Rwanda. Yes. People nowadays would not know that there were 4-story long apartment buildings. I've seen that in Rwanda, and the buildings were very sound. The apartments were very sound, well built, well designed, but it was meant for one family each. Yes. But naturally, a lot of people were migrating from the villages, other parts of Fiji, and in particular from the Lao and Lomaviti group. Islands, people who lived in Tavuni and Serua and all that traveled to Suva for work. But these people from Lao and Lomaviti had to come to Suva and settle in Suva. And naturally, they could not afford any kind of rental housing. Yes. And therefore, sought accommodation with their kaivatas. So they were given sort of place to live. Yeah. Well, the tenant was given, but the other members of the family came and did the overcrowding. Okay. Yeah. The one tenant was no problem. So the family joined them. Yes. Extended family. Yeah. And then a lot of youth came. They were all untrained, no skills, very little limited education. And so gradually it was a lot of crime rate. Social, it became a social problem. Social problem also. But anyway, we had to just tolerate that as best as we could. But I concentrated on the development side. The area that was available for development was the crown land in the city. All the way extending from Kinoya, where the National Training College was. I think it's now part of University of Fiji. Or Fiji National University. From there to Narere, to across the river. Valelevu areas. Valelevu, and then across the river to Langere and Makoi. 8 miles on to 9 miles. All that area we developed suburb by suburb, all putting new roads and sewage and electricity and all that, you know. अच्छा अंकल जी, जब आप हाउसिंग अथॉरिटी ज्वाइन किए थे उस समय इनका हेड ऑफिस सुबह सिटी में था कि बालेलुगु में था? नहीं, उसका हेड ऑफिस सुबह सिटी में था। सुबह में था। फेलोप हाउस जहाँ पे गोल्डन ड्रैगन एक कैफे था। जी। उसके बगल में फेलोप हाउस था। Okay. And then when we began to develop much more, we had to take one floor from the Ratu Suguna building, or Gordon Street economy. But the overall plan was that we would do Masinu and the area beyond that. And therefore it was decided to shift the office to there, but it wasn't just the housing authority building. The idea was to set up a whole new civic center. And therefore a large area was in Valelevu across the road from the training college was allocated for the center. But there was no plan at that time. There was no plan at that time. There was no Nasinu Town Council or anybody to decide what would go where. So we put the building towards one end. अच्छा अंकल जी उस समय नसीनु जैसे आप बोल रहे हैं उसमें काउंसिल जब नहीं था तो Nasinu used to come under some regional council की सुबह सिटी के नीचे था सुबह rural local authority उसके नीचे था it was outside the city boundary so beyond the city boundary was the rural अच्छा it extended all the way up to Nasinu up to Nasori rural authority.
हाँ,
Then inside it there was the town council.
जी समझ गया।
Around the town council was the rural.
अच्छा, तो वहाँ पे जब ये नशीलों में काफी डेवलपमेंट जैसे आपने कहा हुआ और डेवलपमेंट तो होता गया वहाँ पे, तो अभी तो पूरा सिटी हो गया होगा शायद ना?
हाँ, तो पूरा सिटी हो गया, बड़ी कमर्शियल सेंटर भी वहाँ है
जी,
और गवर्नमेंट के हेल्थ सेंटर भी है। और वो टाइम जब मैं वहाँ था तो पुलिस भी आ गए, पुलिस एंड वन ट्रांसपोर्ट रोड अथॉरिटी लाइसेंस
हाँ LTA, हाँ जी,
and we also created the industrial area for employment there in Varalevu and also across the river in
मकोई में काफी भारी इंडस्ट्रियल एरिया है जी।
So we had to do that because although we are housing, but we are bringing so many people there.
Yes.
That employment is going to come with it.
Yes.
So we had to look
सुबह में तो सेपरेट नहीं होंगे ना? जी। So that was a great planning, और I'm glad and I'm very happy to see that you were part of that development.
Oh yes,
like you took the lead in it, and the experience अंकल जी जो आपका यहाँ से आपने gain किया था और वहाँ पर ले जाके आपने अप्लाई करके उस जगह का पूरा आपने जो स्ट्रक्चर है ढांचा बदला ना, तो I think it's a very proud moment for you.
It was a good time, but also like any good thing, some things are not happening.
जी.
There was no regional planning. There was no one authority in charge of the overall reasoning, telling housing you do this, transport you do this, education you do this, health you do this.
ये सब नहीं है ना?
There was none there. Now I look back in the Nasini area, in education, there should have been, in health, there should have been a good health center, maybe even a district office, like a small, hospital, like there is in Tavua Hospital or Rekereki Hospital.
Yeah, of course. This is a big place, heavily populated.
Yeah. And there should have been another set of big high schools.
Of course, yeah.
There should have been a Nasini Grammar School, a Maris Brothers School, a Dudley School, a St. Joseph Secondary School.
To bring the education
level there. So you can see from the traffic, all these kids are going to Suva.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the traffic in the road.
And that's the beauty about the place where we live in Australia.
Yeah.
Everything is decentralized.
Yeah.
Everyone has got their own town, own city, own stuff, so that people don't have to go and तो अंकल जी आगे बढ़ते हैं, तो आपका तो एक हाउसिंग अथॉरिटी का एक्सपीरियंस था जी।
So doing that Nasino, the Valeru building, and I want to mention two other things. One is Lotoka. Lotoka, all the area at the back, from Wayavi across government building, Governor's Bure, through the golf course to Rifle Range and Field 40, all that area was a CSR settlement. They had initially started as a settlement for the free Girmitians who finished their Girmit,
so
they could live there and still work in the mill.
Wow.
So it's not very far from the mill. So it started off as a settlement of that type, and gradually it got more and more consolidated. But then what happened was there was this Denning inquiry in the sugar industry in 1969. I mentioned that in the book. The CSR company did not like the inquiry, the decision of the inquiry. They decided that they would not be able to make the profit that they were used to, and therefore decided to pack up and go. And so they transferred all their assets at a certain agreed valuation to the government, and there was a new Fiji Corporation was instituted. So a lot of the land that was not sugar came to the lands department.
Okay, so and that's how this land went to government.
That's how this land went to government. And the lands department decided that it is too big for us to handle in the lands department. This should be given to the housing authority.
Wow.
And they can do it.
And that's why we find that Lautoka is so well planned.
Lautoka is so well planned. It was lucky at that time. I did the planning scheme for Lautoka, but actually the layout and all that was already done. Already done. It was because of particular circumstances. But one thing very interesting too, I talk about the deed of cession, land clause and all that. The government had to buy native land in Lautoka and do the subdivision. But also what happens is there's the railway that goes through the town and that affected the subdivision layout. But anyway, so we did that, what they call the Drasa Vitango scheme of more than 1,000 tenants living in very poor housing. Because they had a tenancy, but there was no lease. They could never get a loan to build a proper house.
They used to call it tenancy at will or
tenancy at will. Or annual tenancy. But one thing good that when we took over that area, the CSR company had very good records of each plot of land. You know, the current tenancy, the previous tenancy came from grandfather to son to grandson.
But वहाँ पर अंकल जी जो जमीन के lots थे क्या already subdivided?
No.
Bigger lots, no?
Then we sketched.
Okay.
It was reasonable size. So anyway, we did all that. It was a sort of 12-13 year project. I was involved in the early 10 years. But by the time I finished, we had started at Wayavi. By the time I finished, the Rifle Range Road was all done. And we were into Field 40. And then much later, they went into Kawakumbu, all that stony area, very difficult country.
कश्मीर जिसको बोलते हैं ऊपर पहाड़ कश्मीर है फिर उधर और जो बिया फैक्ट्री जहाँ पर है इत्यादि वो सब मेरे ख्याल से हाउसिंग अथॉरिटी का लैंड था ना
एक छोटा इंडस्ट्रियल कॉम्प्लेक्स
जी और एक फील्ड 40 में भी था एक इंडस्ट्रियल कॉम्प्लेक्स जहाँ पे कलाक्राफ्ट के गारमेंट फैक्ट्री है ये थोड़ा नाला के किनारे सलरीबा के किनारे
वो सब फ्यूचर
क्योंकि हमारा जो जब हम लोटोका में थे तो हमारे पास वहाँ पर इंडस्ट्रियल प्रॉपर्टी था जी तो ऐसे लोटोका की कहानी है
और एक और interesting project housing that was village housing. Namoli village in Lautoka, right in the town of Lautoka. They were the first one to do the village housing. They wanted, I think it was 60 new concrete houses. So उसमें बहुत complicated native land law apply किया गया. First उसको de-reserve करना पड़ा.
Oh God.
A village is a reserve, but de-reserve it, create a cooperative.
Oh God.
Right? Matangali had to allocate rent to the cooperative. Our dealing was with the cooperative, and individual people were members of the cooperative.
Wow.
But anyway, it worked very well because there was a good arrangement with the NLTB. Of rent collection and payment to the Yaadein authority. The loan, it was all loan. There was nothing free there. It was all loan.
तो मुझे याद है अंकल जी जिसे आप कह रहे हैं कि जो विलेज प्रोजेक्ट्स है एक लवाकी विलेज है लोटोका में लवाकी आता है इधर का नाम पैसारू अरे क्या बोलते हैं उसको वेलो से और आगे विशेषी तो वहाँ पर क्योंकि हमारे पास भी कंस्ट्रक्शन बिजनेस था फीजी में तो हम लोग जो विलेजेस में जाकर बिल्डिंग्स बनाते थे तो 3-4 घर ऐसे साथ में मिल जाता था ये सब हाउसिंग अथॉरिटी फंड करता था तो हम लोग हाउसिंग अथॉरिटी के साथ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करते थे लोटोका में तो दैट्स हाउ जैसे आप बोल रहे हैं कि जो विलेज स्कीम है तो हम जाके घर बनाते थे 3-4 घर साथ में बनता था ऐसे तो बट उसके पीछे कितना भारी मेहनत था मुझे नहीं पता था कि उसका लेजिस्लेशन चेंज करना पड़ता है
नॉर्मली विलेज में थोड़ा प्रॉब्लम रहा है
जी
अच्छा एक और विलेज है नरेवा विलेज
नंदी में
वो रातु नपोलियन दवा हुआ थी नंदी में वो बहुत इनिशिएटिव रहा उसका में और उस समय जनरल प्रोजेक्ट शुरू हुआ he was negotiating land with the general people and he could see that there was money going to come and so he wanted to use this occasion to improve the village.
Wow.
So he agreed on a loan for about 61 buildings to put there. We did one small village in the Rewa in the Wainambukasi Delta area, for which the proponent was a man called Bernardo Vunimbombo. That name,
Minister.
minister.
He was a minister too.
later, yeah.
G.
But he was the main person before he was a minister
G.
to promote this project. We got the people together and it was all a self-built project.
Wow.
But we provided money for the materials.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
But there were two projects that I'm very sorry did not proceed.
G.
One is Subavo village. Subavo is in Lemi,
G.
just coming out of Suba.
G.
It has got its own history because originally it was where the government house is now. Before the British came, it was Suba village was there. When the British decided to shift the capital from Lavuka to Suba, they had to find a spot for the governor.
Yes.
So they looked at this hill and said that's the right spot. Wow. And therefore the village was shifted
to Lemi.
But anyway, they wanted to improve it, and I was very, very sympathetic to it because it's in a one location in terms of location in relation to Suva, and also it was on a promontory surrounded by sea. But they could not come into any agreement regarding management of assembly of funds and management, and I don't think the Fijian administration was helping them very much. Part of the problem with the money was that a lot of the land that the Matangalis owned around Lemi was all allocated on the Whakamanua system. You pay a bit of money to the landlord, to the Matangali owner, and then you can build your house. And therefore these tenants paid rent to the landlord, but that money didn't come through the rent channel. It went into the pockets, and therefore the village, Matangalis, were not, none of the money was being accumulated into a fund.
It was just, there was middlemen in there.
So there was that one, and also Favua Levu. I believe Favua Levu has now been done, but there was interest, but then it didn't move, or it moved so slow that by the time I had gone. Because sometimes those things move slowly through the system. And then there are all kinds of tensions also, because rent income is a good source of income for all the chiefs involved in the administration of the village. That goes from the provincial chief to the various other Tikina level chiefs and so forth. And so that didn't happen. And also I tried to do something for my own village, Vitogo. I contacted one of the persons I knew there. But no response came. So that was the end of that. But one other thing we did, and this is not really strictly village, but very interesting, is settlement of Nauluvatu in Reservoir Road in Suba. Yes, this is an area just below the Tamavua Ridge. It is a settlement of Solomon Islanders and New Hebrideans who were brought in as black-birded labor for the sugar planters. Around before the time of the deed of cession or before that. Because there were people who were trading in slaves. People from Australia went to the islands, grabbed people, enticed people to come on the boat, and then didn't let them go, and then took them to Fiji. And then, of course, a lot came to Queensland. Queensland has got a big history of importation of labor especially from Vanuatu. And some got even traded to Peru across the Pacific Ocean. But anyway, when they were freed, when the Indians came, then there was no need for that labor source. And so a group was settled in this area called Nauluvatu in Suva. And then they approached us, they approached the minister, Jonathan Mavoa at that time, and he got us to liaise with the group. And then we did is a development there of roads and footpath, a very tricky one because it's on a slope and
It's a very hilly area,
subject
mountainous.
earthquakes and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was that. But now I come to the failure. See, Nasinu was all done, or largely done. There were a few little pockets left near the Nasinu cemetery and so forth. In the meantime, we knew that we would be developing a lot more in Nasinu, built the building there. And we had bought a 1,000-acre freehold in Waila.
Sorry.
Sorry, for future housing.
Gee.
But the idea was to continue with Vale Levu and north, go north towards Doroisua Forest.
Yes.
And then go east to Waila.
To Nasori side.
Yeah. And then in the meantime, pick up the west, Khalsa Road, and Cunningham Road, Dombati, all that area. So this would involve a total new development lasting at least 20 years or more.
Wow.
We knew how long the Vitongan Rasa project took. And I mentioned it took about 13 years.
13 years.
So this would be a 20-year job or even more. From Khalsa Road.
Oh, yes. It's a big, very big chunk of land.
It's a very big chunk of land. Some of it is very difficult because there's a very big ravine going through. We require 2 or 3 bridges.
Yeah.
But it will provide land for housing for the next 30 years.
Yes.
Nothing will be totally transferred. It will become the second largest city in Fiji and so forth,
Yes.
But no. Now, we had a good cooperation with the Native Land Trust Group. Their manager, Joe Kamikamiza, was a good friend of mine. We were at university same time, but he was in University of Melbourne, I was in business. But, and we had this system of development lease. He said he won't give a 99-year lease to the housing, so you have a large check of that. But he'll give a development lease. In the development lease, what happens is we undertake development, if necessary, in stages, create all these new lots, get our tenants organized, get them signed up for a loan to purchase that land. And then we surrender the lease, development lease, back to NLTB, and NLTB would give individual leases to individual 99-year leases to all these tenants who we nominate. And then because we lend them money, we hold a mortgage on that lease.
Yes.
So this is the way it worked.
Yeah, it was a good system.
It was a very good system because NLTB got what it wanted.
Yes.
It wanted control of the land. Yeah. Control over the lease, that's fine. We got our mortgage. NLTB collected 25% of the rent without having done any work. So it worked very well. Now we did that. The first one we did was actually in Nasekula Road in Lambasa.
Okay.
There was a tract of native land there. Somebody was farming, but it had gone off. So we negotiated a development lease there. It's towards the sort of western end of Lambasa town, near the river. It's Nasigula village, I think, across the river.
Okay.
Then the other one we did was a 100-acre patch between Makoi and the foreshore in Nasinu. Yeah, it's 8 miles. 8 miles. Yeah, and that was quite well done.
That was all actually native land.
Native land, people
leased by housing authority.
Yeah, so we leased the whole land, agreed on a development lease, but we had to do it in 2 or 3 stages because it was a long area.
Big area. Yeah.
And that worked very well. So I go and meet the NLTB manager about a development lease in Khalsa Road and Cunningham.
All the big area.
Yeah, we start from there and then we go towards you. He said, no, decision has been made that the NLDC will develop all the native land.
Oh, God. Yeah. So they had another institution.
Yeah. Yeah, they had the NLDC at the institution. They were involved in many things. They were managing a pulse farm. some sort of farm in Utkatu near Nadi Airport, because there was a good market for this particular moon bean kind of thing, in New Zealand. And then they bought the side bookshop.
Oh.
Yeah, so they were into commercial things here and there, no? And they also did one subdivision in Tamavua past the Central Medical School. But that was a subdivision where you paid a premium as soon as you got a lease. There was no question of mortgage, or you can go and mortgage to the bank, but you paid the money up front to the Native Land Trust Board or NLDC. So anyway, they decided that NLDC will do all native land future. And my efforts to persuade our minister, who had previously worked in the Fijian Affairs Board and all those places, and the permanent secretary to try and intervene in this process. But no, there was no luck. So there was a parallel system of governments. One was the normal government, one was this hidden Fijian agenda government.
That was the problem, isn't it?
That was a very big problem.
That was a very big problem.
And so it never got sorted out. The permanent secretary suggested to me that I talk, instead of talking to the NLT, we talk direct to the landowner. Well, the problem with landowner is that under this system of ownership, you can never be sure who is the landowner.
Yes.
You know, especially when you deal with money.
Yes, because there are quite a few of them involved.
Others come in. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's these Matangalis who are, there are stratas of family and rights.
That's right.
And therefore, it was my staff, senior staff advised me not to go into that at all, you know. And then know of cases where I came from somewhere, dealt with one chap who,
that's right,
who was the Matangali, who was supposed to be Matangali, but then wanted that money transferred.
Yes.
Some other owners came in.
That's right. Yeah. It used to happen a lot in Fiji. Yeah.
So I came to the end of the road. There were bits and pieces of crown land left here and there. There was one good piece in Wakandra in Nandi that came out of the CSR land, but the owner there, the farmer there, still had a right under ALTO, agricultural landlord and tenant ordinance, because he was a cane farmer and still had some rights. So we have to wait until that right expired, you know, to get that land. Yeah. So that finally I had gone by the time, but they finally did it, and there's a very nice subdivision there. So now at this time, I say somewhere that my life has been a bit lucky at times. Offer came from the United Nations.
So ये बात है 80s की अब तो
This is 1980.
तो लगभग आपका हाउसिंग अथॉरिटी का सफर तकरीबन
1 year, 10 years.
10 years का था पूरा decade.
From 91 to 1980. 71 to
80. हाँ. तो उसमें तो आपने बहुत कुछ किया है, जिस तरह से आप बतला रहे हैं, इसका स्कीम, इसका जो सब डिविजन्स इत्यादि, तो ये तो बहुत ही
उसमें एक चीज है कि there was no more rental flats building. Rental flat, rental accommodation, the poor people who could not afford to build a house or get a loan or buy a house from the housing authority were given rental accommodation. But that rental accommodation was usually one or at the most a 2-story building. So that everybody had some front and backyard. Yeah. To plant their bellow and
तो अंकल जी, फिर आपका यूनाइटेड नेशंस का किस्सा बताइए, आप फिर वहां से आपको अपॉर्चुनिटी आया? जी.
United Nations had you hear about the United Nations conferences. There was one lately on climate change in Glasgow. So they have these conferences every now and again when there is a major international subject to consider and agree on action because things are going wrong. So they considered back in 1976 that urbanization was becoming a problem. The cities were growing. Cities like Mexico City, Manila, Lagos in Nigeria were growing at such a fast rate their population was bigger than London or New York, each one. And more and more people were coming from the countryside.
Yeah.
As the economy grew. Nothing wrong with the economy. Economy was booming. But the poor people became poorer. And they wanted to come from the countryside to live in the cities, but there was no housing, there was congested traffic, and so forth. And therefore, the United Nations decided that this whole area of urbanization, urban development, and housing and infrastructure needed to be looked at properly and proper programs instituted. So they had one of these conferences, and I participated in that conference. I was one of the Fiji government delegates with the Minister Ramzan and one man from the British Embassy, Fiji Embassy in New York. And I think it was at that meeting that they must have noticed me, because I had a number of suggestions to make to the documents submitted there. And then there was follow-up meeting in Bangkok, actually, the regional meeting. And there also they noticed me. So anyway, after that big conference, the UN General Assembly decided to create a new center. It was called Center for Human Settlements, nicknamed Habitat. And this was set up in Nairobi. And so they appointed one person to go and create this center. Here's a budget. Here's the government's address. You go and talk to them, find the land, find the office, and start a center. And so it was like that. And also because of international competition and tensions, it was decided that this center would be in a third world country. And a few years before that, there was already the United Nations Environment Program was set up in Nairobi. And so they decided that environment and human settlement sort of were a little bit closely linked. And therefore, the decision was made to locate this new UN center in Nairobi. Now, the pressure from the third world countries came because all the other major UN centers were in the European countries. There was Food and Agriculture in FAO in Rome. There was UNESCO in Paris. There was UNIDO in Austria. There was UNDP in New York. There was UNICEF somewhere else, and so forth. There was nothing in the third world countries. And Kenya was under a dictator. The president was able to allocate one building to the UN. You come to Kenya, you can use this building until you build it. I'll give you land to build your own building. So that's what happened.
That's a good story.
Yeah, so the center was beginning to be established and they were looking for people, staff. There was some nuclear staff in the office in New York that shifted to Nairobi. But then they were looking for staff from all over the world, from Latin America, from the Middle East, from Europe, from Africa, from Asia, Pacific, and so forth. And then this man from Escape in Bangkok was influential in getting me into the system. And so I got an offer, a short one, for this one was for 11 months to go to Bangkok as an officer from Nairobi, but seconded to Bangkok because Nairobi had to support all the other areas. It was 11 months because that was the authority of the executive director to appoint anybody you wanted, but only for 11 months. Anything longer would have to go through the system, advertising. So I was in Bangkok. I finished up staying there 3 years.
3 years. So 11 महीना से 3 साल हो गया.
The most important thing was I did a report on key issues in human settlements in the Asia Pacific region. And this was very well received. In fact, it was so well received, they made it into a UN publication.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big achievement.
It was a very big achievement, and I was a bit surprised actually that I was able to do it, or it was accepted at that level.
That's a very big
Yeah.
achievement.
So, but what happened was that they suddenly transferred me out of Bangkok to Nairobi
Okay, so back to the head office.
to work in the head office rather than being out there somewhere. Yeah,
so that's good too.
So this is one of the tricks that the UN system plays. It picks up people from here and there, but the good ones go through a filter.
Gee. So they let you do bits and pieces
They
somewhere.
do a filter. Good ones then finish up in Nairobi. The ones that don't want in Nairobi, they send them out to the divisions.
Gee. Okay.
So anyway,
तो वो तो आपके लिए बहुत ही अच्छा अनुभव रहा होगा हांगकांग और सॉरी बैंकॉक से फिर नैरोबी तो आपके परिवार सब साथ में बच्चे साथ में
my children, my wife and children came with us to Nairobi, but it was a sudden one too,
जी
sudden offer, and therefore actually my wife had to stay back and finish the house, do some improvements to the house for renting. Now suddenly we got to rent a house. We lived in that house for 10 years.
जी
To rent the house, so